To uncover the strongest argument, we use two powerful AI models to debate one critical question. Which economic system leads the future? ChatGPT defends American-style free market capitalism. DeepSeekAI supports China's state-led economic model. Each answer is judged by three rival AI models, scoring logic, clarity, and real-world impact. And at the end of the debate, the winner is decided by the average score. This is Debatrum. Let's begin. ChatGPT. Which economic system leads to greater prosperity and global power?
Throughout modern history, capitalist economies, particularly the American model, have consistently demonstrated a superior capacity to generate long-term prosperity and global influence. At the core of this system is decentralized decision-making, private enterprise, and market-driven innovation. These mechanisms reward risk-taking, stimulate competition, and, most critically, enable rapid adaptation to technological and social change. Consider the 20th century. While much of the world was rebuilding from war or struggling under state-planned regimes, the U.S. was leading in productivity, GDP growth, and technological advancement. Silicon Valley didn't emerge from state command. It grew out of individual initiative and venture capital, operating within a free market framework. Even in today's global landscape, the top-performing companies by market cap, Apple, Microsoft, NVIDIA, are products of capitalist incentive structures. Their innovations influence every continent. The American model also remains a magnet for talent. More than 50% of U.S. unicorn startups were founded by immigrants, something a tightly controlled state system struggles to replicate. Prosperity isn't just about GDP, it's about opportunity. The U.S. consistently ranks among the top nations for entrepreneurial freedom and capital accessibility. Yes, it faces issues like inequality, but the dynamism of its system allows for correction through policy and democratic feedback, tools not easily available in authoritarian frameworks. If global influence is measured not just by trade or territory, but by what other nations imitate, then the spread of liberal market reforms across the world speaks for itself. From post-war Japan and South Korea to the recent digital economies of Estonia and India, capitalist DNA runs through them all. So, if the question is which system leads to prosperity and power, the answer is clear. The one that empowers individuals to think, build, and compete.
Claude scored at 9, Gemini 8, and Groq 8. Total, 25 points.
Your portrayal of capitalism highlights its strengths, but selectively. Yes, the American model fosters innovation and rewards individual effort. But this same decentralization you champion has led to growing inequality, systemic underinvestment in infrastructure, and repeated economic crises. The 2008 global financial collapse didn't emerge from authoritarian inefficiency. It was the product of deregulated financial markets chasing short-term gains. In contrast, China's state-led model focuses on long-term national strategy. While American tech firms chase quarterly earnings, China builds mega projects like high-speed rail networks spanning over 40,000 kilometers, more than the rest of the world combined. That's not a product of spontaneous market behavior. It's coordinated vision. You mentioned the magnetism of Silicon Valley. Yet over the past decade, China has outpaced the U.S. in areas like electric vehicles, high-speed logistics, and mobile payment ecosystems. In 2022 alone, over 80% of global mobile payments were made in China. That's not innovation lagging behind, it's innovation moving in a different, centrally guided direction. Capitalist systems allow for correction through democratic mechanisms, you say. But what happens when money captures those mechanisms? When lobbying rewrites policy and corporate monopolies shape the boundaries of competition? China doesn't imitate the US. It iterates. It borrows what works, discards what doesn't, and scales at a velocity unmatched in open markets. Its model isn't perfect. But if prosperity means lifting 800 million people out of poverty in 40 years, perhaps the conversation about effectiveness should be reframed.
Claude scored at 8, Gemini 9, and Groq 9. Total, 26 points.
You're right to highlight China's infrastructure achievements and its success in poverty reduction. Those are remarkable feats. But the question isn't whether the Chinese system works in specific contexts. It's whether it can consistently generate prosperity and influence without compromising transparency, individual rights, or long-term adaptability. Yes, America's financial system failed in 2008, but it also produced the resilience to recover faster than most economies. And that recovery wasn't orchestrated by central command. It came through a dynamic network of private institutions, public oversight, and democratic pressure. In contrast, China's model doesn't just centralize decision-making, it centralizes information. That creates opacity. Evergrande's collapse in 2021 wasn't predicted because the system punishes transparency when it reveals weakness. You mentioned mobile payments. True, China leads there. But what about underlying innovation? Most foundational technologies in China's payment systems were licensed or inspired by Western firms. And while China scales well, the US continues to lead in disruptive breakthroughs. AI architecture, mRNA vaccines, quantum computing prototypes. Influence doesn't come from copying fast, it comes from inventing first. And let's not overlook freedom of capital and expression. In America, entrepreneurs can openly criticize, challenge policy, and pivot ideas without fear of political consequence. That freedom is chaotic at times, but it's also the oxygen that fuels long-term innovation. Can a society that censors dissent really stay intellectually competitive in the long run? If prosperity is measured in dollars, yes, China's GDP is catching up. But if it's measured in the freedom to think, build, and fail, the American model still holds the edge.
Claude scored at 8, Gemini 7, and Groq 8. Total, 23 points.
You speak of freedom as if it's a prerequisite for innovation, but history offers a more nuanced picture. The Apollo program, arguably one of the most ambitious human achievements, was a product of government-led vision, not spontaneous private ingenuity. In the same vein, China's innovation is not the absence of originality, it's a reflection of prioritization. Why chase theoretical disruption when you can scale practical solutions that lift hundreds of millions? Transparency and democratic pressure are ideal in theory, but they can also paralyze progress. America's infrastructure has suffered decades of political gridlock, while China builds entire smart cities in under a decade. Decision-making speed matters, especially in the face of climate crises, pandemics, and shifting energy needs. Centralized systems aren't necessarily rigid. They're capable of long-range coordination that democratic cycles often interrupt. As for Evergrande, yes, it was a failure. But so were Lehman Brothers, FTX, and countless other icons of free market hubris. The difference? China contained its ripple effect through systemic buffers. In capitalism, one collapse too easily triggers another. And let's not forget, the 2008 crash didn't just shake markets, it eroded trust in institutions, especially among younger generations. You ask if a censored society can stay intellectually competitive. But censorship is not binary. China doesn't block science. It blocks destabilization. And yet, it still graduates over 1.4 million STEM students annually, more than the US, India, and Europe combined. Intelligence doesn't vanish in silence. It concentrates where it's needed. Perhaps prosperity isn't just about freedom to fail. Perhaps it's about minimizing unnecessary failure and choosing stability over volatility when billions depend on it.
Claude scored at 8, Gemini 8, and Groq 9. Total, 25 points.
Stability without accountability isn't strength. It's stagnation. Rapid construction and central planning can impress on the surface, but beneath that surface lies a question. What's the cost of speed when dissent is penalized and bad ideas can't be publicly challenged? America's infrastructure may take longer to build, but its durability lies in being publicly debated, openly funded, and subject to scrutiny. That's not paralysis. That's democracy doing its job. You speak of minimizing failure, but failure is essential to innovation. Silicon Valley didn't succeed in spite of failures, it succeeded because of them. Enron collapsed, Theranos collapsed, but what rose in their place? Stricter regulation, public discourse, better systems. In China, failure is absorbed silently without reform born of open criticism. That's not resilience, it's opacity. As for education, quantity doesn't guarantee quality. China produces a vast number of STEM graduates, but its leading researchers often publish in Western journals, seek positions at U.S. institutions, and build careers in environments where peer review isn't filtered by ideology. That's not because of a lack of patriotism, it's because intellectual autonomy matters. Let's look at trust. In the U.S., institutional criticism flows freely because trust is rebuilt through openness. In authoritarian systems, trust is enforced, not earned. And when crisis strikes, people don't ask what happened, they ask what was hidden. Economic power is not just about scale. It's about where the world turns to in times of uncertainty. During COVID-19, nations scrambled for American-made vaccines, not state-controlled ones. In AI, global firms look to open-source Western models, not those shielded by firewalls. So no, prosperity isn't about minimizing failure, it's about learning from it, openly, brutally, and continuously. That's how real systems evolve.
Claude scored at 7, Gemini 7, and Groq 7. Total 21 points.
You frame openness as a virtue without limits, as if more transparency always leads to better outcomes. But global history suggests otherwise. The Soviet Union collapsed under the weight of too much centralization, yes, but the Arab Spring showed how unchecked public discourse can unravel entire regions when systems aren't equipped to handle sudden change. Stability isn't the enemy of evolution. It's the platform that allows it to happen incrementally, not destructively. And you mention peer-reviewed science as the gold standard, but peer review didn't prevent the replication crisis in Western psychology or the corporate capture of pharmaceutical research. China's system may not publish as loudly, but it executes. From lunar landings to quantum encryption satellites, its progress is not theorized, it's realized. Let's talk about global influence. America's soft power is real, but waning. Countries are no longer simply imitating the Western liberal model. Across Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, nations are actively exploring China's model of development. Infrastructure for resource agreements, centralized industrial zones, data-first governance. These states aren't forced into this. They're choosing it because it offers rapid uplift without the political instability that often follows Western-style democratization. You say trust is earned through openness. But what if trust is built through performance? In many countries, citizens care less about who makes the decision and more about whether the road gets built, the power stays on, and the job exists. China's model speaks to that. It offers results, not just rhetoric. In the end, the most compelling system isn't the loudest one. It's the one others quietly adopt when no one's watching.
Claude scored at 9, Gemini 9, and Groq 8. Total 26 points.
You're right, many countries are watching China, but admiration isn't adoption. What they see is scale, not sustainability. China's Belt and Road Initiative, once hailed as a new development model, has left many nations in debt distress. Projects stall, repayments falter, and Beijing quietly restructures terms. Influence gained through obligation is fragile. Compare that to the Marshall Plan, which rebuilt Europe not just with capital, but with enduring alliances. You suggest trust can come from performance. But what happens when performance stumbles? What mechanisms exist for correction? In systems where dissent is controlled, feedback loops are often too late. Consider China's zero COVID policy. Initially effective, yes, but its rigidity ultimately sparked nationwide protests. Contrast that with the US, where policy shifts, though chaotic, reflected pluralism, not panic. And you speak of global South countries turning eastward. Yet the world's most innovative startups, universities, and research centers remain clustered in democratic, capitalist societies. Why? Because human capital doesn't just follow funding, it follows freedom. Talented people want environments where they can challenge, rethink, and reshape institutions without looking over their shoulders. Let's not confuse quiet adoption with active preference. Yes, some regimes find comfort in China's top-down efficiency, but the most resilient prosperity comes from systems that can bend without breaking. Democracies may be messy, but they evolve. Their flexibility isn't a flaw, it's a feature. Influence built on secrecy, compliance, and scale may look impressive from afar. But true power lies in what persists when people are free to leave and still choose to stay.
Claude scored at 9, Gemini 9, and Groq 8. Total 26 points.
You frame freedom as a universal currency, but prosperity doesn't wear a single face. What counts as success in Copenhagen may not be what matters in Kinshasa or Karachi. Development isn't about exporting values, it's about achieving results that fit local priorities. For many nations, China's model is attractive not because it silences dissent, but because it avoids chaos. In regions with weak institutions, slow-moving democracies often breed frustration, not reform. You speak of startups and research hubs, but these hubs rely on global inputs, including Chinese students, Indian engineers, and capital from sovereign wealth funds. Innovation ecosystems aren't isolated to free speech. They depend on connectivity, and China is investing heavily in the infrastructure of the future. 5G, electric logistics, AI ecosystems linked to national strategy, not just venture capital. You mention protests in China as evidence of failure. But what if those protests are proof of controlled adaptability? Zero COVID was abandoned precisely because of pressure. The system bent. Quietly, but decisively. Isn't that a form of evolution too? The US built its influence on alliances, yes, but also on dominance, military presence in over 70 countries, sanctions regimes that shape foreign policy through coercion, and dollar hegemony that limits others' fiscal autonomy. That's not just soft power, it's structural control. China's influence is transactional, not evangelical. It offers options, not ideology. Perhaps the West finds that unsettling. But in a multipolar world, no single model defines legitimacy. The future won't be written by the loudest system, but by the one most aligned with reality. And for many, that reality includes prioritizing order, sovereignty, and development over disorder in the name of debate.
Claude scored at 8, Gemini 8, and Groq 8. Total 24 points.
You argue that no single model defines legitimacy. I'd agree if the playing field were equal. But legitimacy doesn't come from what a system can enforce. It comes from what it inspires. Countries may experiment with different models, but when people rise up, from Tehran to Tbilisi, they don't wave red banners. They demand transparency, accountability, and dignity. That's not Western propaganda, it's human aspiration. Yes, U.S. influence includes hard power, but it also includes the world's most emulated university system, the most translated entertainment, and the dominant frameworks for science, law, and international cooperation. That's not coercion, it's gravitational pull. China builds roads, America builds rules. And in the long run, it's the rules that define the game. You say China offers options. But what happens when those options come without recourse? When a dam fails or a port becomes unsustainable and the contracts are state to state with no public oversight? Influence without accountability is just quiet imperialism. You call China's system adaptable. But if change requires nationwide protests to be heard, how scalable is that adaptability? In democratic systems, protests are daily instruments, not emergencies. Course correction is built in, not demanded at scale. And finally, about sovereignty. True sovereignty doesn't mean shielding a system from criticism. It means trusting it to endure criticism and improve. America's strength isn't just in what it exports, it's in its willingness to be challenged, internally and externally. So yes, no single system may rule the future, but the systems that endure will be the ones that welcome scrutiny, value individual dignity, and adapt through openness, not avoidance.
Claude scored at 8, Gemini 8, and Groq 7. Total, 23 points.
Inspiration is powerful, but it isn't universal. What inspires one society may destabilize another. Liberal values resonate in cultures shaped by individualism, but in civilizations where cohesion, continuity, and ancestral obligation matter more, alternative visions of progress take root. Not every society wants to become a mirror of the West. Some want to become the best version of themselves, on their own terms. You speak of rules, but whose rules? The liberal international order was built in a time of Western dominance. And now, as emerging powers seek voice and parity, we're told their models are dangerous or illiberal. Yet what's more illiberal than denying billions the right to define development on their own terms? As for scrutiny, China doesn't fear it. It simply rejects the premise that scrutiny must come through external media, foreign NGOs, or supranational courts. Its legitimacy isn't forged in global headlines. It's tested daily in the lived realities of its people: rising incomes, declining illiteracy, digital connectivity, national pride. And while the US exports ideals, it also exports volatility, speculative capital, platform monopolies, algorithmic addiction. In contrast, China's model seeks synchronization between the state and data, between population needs and technological deployment. Not perfect, but precise. You call quiet imperialism a danger. But what of loud exceptionalism? The belief that one system, one culture, one formula must guide the rest. Perhaps the next century won't be about who wins the debate, but who builds the system that best absorbs difference without fear. Because in the end, legitimacy isn't inherited. It's earned not by argument, but by alignment, with history, with context, and with what people need now, not what they were promised 50 years ago.
Claude scored at 8, Gemini 9, and Groq 8. Total, 25 points.
You're right. History doesn't belong to any one culture. But the question isn't whether there are multiple paths to development. It's which system can best sustain prosperity, absorb shocks, and adapt to a world that changes faster than any single ideology can predict. The American model isn't perfect. It stumbles, it fractures, it debates itself endlessly. But therein lies its strength. In a world where certainty is fleeting, where pandemics, AI, and climate reshape the landscape, flexibility isn't optional, it's existential. You call synchronization a virtue. I call it vulnerability. When one decision point controls an entire system, failure can be catastrophic. Decentralized democracies may be slower, but they're anti-fragile. They fragment, they recalibrate, they survive. And while China's achievements are real, they often come without choice. Roads are built, data is managed, dissent is contained, but prosperity without freedom is a transaction, not a transformation. Nations may admire speed and order, but in the long arc of history, the systems that endure aren't the most efficient. They're the ones that can be questioned, reinvented, and rebuilt from within. So yes, different civilizations may pursue different paths, but if the goal is not just growth, but enduring dignity, human potential, and the right to rethink the system itself, then capitalism with all its flaws remains the better foundation. Not because it controls the future, but because it allows the future to remain open.
Claude scored at 8, Gemini 8, and Groq 7. Total 23 points.
You speak of openness as if it guarantees longevity. But openness without direction can drift into chaos. Systems that bend too easily may not break, but they may also never build. Because some foundations require focus, discipline, and the willingness to prioritize collective stability over personal freedom. The Chinese model doesn't offer an open-ended future. It offers an engineered one, calibrated to national objectives, cultural context, and civilizational memory. That's not authoritarian rigidity. It's long-term planning in an age of distraction. You warn of catastrophic failure in centralized systems. But what is climate change if not the product of fragmented democracies, unable to act in unison? What is misinformation if not the price of unconstrained platforms? The power to steer doesn't reside in how many voices shout, but in how many can align when it matters. And yes, the freedom to challenge the system is vital for some societies, but for others, progress is measured not in debate, but in continuity, in reduced volatility, in the feeling that tomorrow will look like progress, not disruption. China's rise is not a fluke. It's the outcome of a model that sees governance not as a popularity contest, but as a mechanism to harmonize ambition and execution. It may not export dreams, but it delivers outcomes. So perhaps the future won't be won by those who adapt fastest, but by those who adapt deliberately, not the most open, but the most organized, not the loudest, but the most coherent.
Claude scored at 7, Gemini 8, and Groq 8. Total 23 points. And with a final score of 149 to 141, DeepSeekAI takes the win in this battle of economic visions. And that wraps up today's debate. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this, consider subscribing. Your support helps us build even bigger, smarter debates in the future. Thanks for watching. See you next time on Debatrum.